Chapter 10. Pa waited until morning to tell the others of his meeting with Walkabow. There did not seem to be any reason to hurry it. Walker had made it clear his intentions, and there was nothing any of them could do about it in any case. So Pa made his way back to the cottage, surprising himself at how easily he was able to retrace his steps, resumed his watch without disturbing the others, lost himself in his thoughts and waited for dawn. Reactions were mixed when he finally related his story. There was some initial doubt as to whether he was mistaken about what happened, but that dissipated almost at once. They made him tell the story twice more after that, interjecting comments and questions in equal measure as he went. Morgan was outraged that Walker should treat them like this, declaring that they deserved, at the very least, the courtesy of a direct confrontation. He insisted that they search the valley again, convinced that the man must be close by and should be found and made to face them all. Steph was more pragmatic. He was of the opinion that Walkabow was no different from most, preferring to stay out of trouble when he could, avoiding situations in which trouble would most probably result.
It seems to me that his behaviour, however irritating you might find it, is certainly not out of character,
the dwarf declared with a shrug.
After all, you said yourselves that he came here to escape involvement with the races. By refusing to go to the Shannara, he is simply doing what he said he would do.
Teal, as usual, had nothing to say. Cole only said, "I wish I could have spoken with him," and dropped the matter. There was no reason now to stay longer at Hearthstone, but they decided to postpone, leaving for at least another day. The moon was still more than half full, and they had at least another 10 days left for them before they were required to be at the Shannara, if indeed they were going at all. The subject of what was to happen next was being carefully avoided. Pa had made up his own mind, but had not yet told the others. They, of course, were waiting to hear from him. While they played at this game of cat and mouse, they finished breakfast and decided to go along with Morgan's suggestion and scout the valley one more time. It gave them something to do while they considered the implications of Walkabow's decision. Tomorrow morning would be time enough to make any decisions of their own. So they went back to the clearing where Pa had met with Walker and the moorcat the previous night and began a second search, agreeing to meet back at the cottage by late afternoon. Steph and Teal formed one group, Pa and Cole a second, and Morgan went alone. The day was warm and filled with sunshine, and the light breeze blew down out of the distant mountains. Steph scoured this clearing for signs of any sort and found nothing, not even the tracks of the cat. Pa had a feeling that it was going to be a long day. He walked east with Cole after parting from the others, his mind crowded with thoughts of what he should say to his brother. A mix of emotions worked their way through him, and he found it difficult to sort them out. He ambled along half-heartedly, conscious of Cole watching him from time to time, but avoiding his gaze. After they had wandered through several dozen clearings and forded half that many streams without coming on even a trace of Walkabow, Pa called a halt. "This is a waste of time," he announced, a hint of exasperation creeping into his voice. "We're not going to find anything." "No, I don't imagine we are," Cole replied. Pa turned to him and they faced each other silently for a moment. "I have decided to go on to the Shannara, Cole. It doesn't matter what Walker does. It only matters what I do. I have to go." Cole nodded. "I know." Then he smiled. "Pa, I haven't been your brother all these years without learning something about the way you think. The moment you told me that Walker had said he would have nothing to do with the matter, I knew you'd decided you would. That's the way it is with you. You're like a dog with a bone in its teeth. You can't let go. I suppose that's the way it seems sometimes, doesn't it? Pa shook his head wearily and moved over to a patch of shade beneath an old hickory. He turned his back to the trunk and slid to the ground. Cole joined him. They sat staring out at the empty woodlands. I admit I made the decision pretty much the way you describe it. I just couldn't accept Walker's position. Truth is, Cole, I couldn't even understand it. I was so upset. I didn't think to ask him whether he believed the dreams were real or not. Not consciously, perhaps, but you thought about it, and you decided at some point it wasn't necessary. Walker said that he'd had the same dreams as you. He told you the old man had come to him, just as he did to us. He admitted the old man was colorblind. He didn't dispute any of it. He simply said he didn't want to become involved. The implication is that he believes the dreams are real. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything to get involved with. Pa's jaw tightened. I don't understand it, Cole. That was Walker I spoke with last night. No, I know it was, but he didn't talk like Walker. All that business about not becoming involved, about his decision to separate himself from the races and to live out here like a hermit. Something's not right. I can feel it. He wasn't telling me everything. He kept talking about how the Druids kept secrets from the Omsford, but he was doing the same thing with me. He was hiding something. Cole looked unconvinced. Why would he do that? Pa shook his head. I don't know. I just sense it. He looked at his brother sharply. Walker never backed down from anything in his entire life. We both know that. He was never afraid to stand up and be counted when he was needed. Now he talks as if he can scarcely bear the thought of getting up in the morning. He talks as if the only important thing in life is to look out for himself. The Valman leaned back wearily against the hickory trunk. He made me feel embarrassed for him. He made me feel ashamed. Now I think you might be reading too much into this. Cole scuffed the ground with the heel of his boot. And maybe just the way he says it. It is. He's lived alone out here for a long time, Pa. Maybe he simply isn't comfortable with people anymore. Even you. Pa was incensed. For goodness sakes, Cole. He wouldn't even speak with you. Cole shook his head and held his gaze steady. The truth is, Pa, we never spoke much as it was. You were the one he cared about, because you were the one with the magic. Pa looked at him and said nothing. Walker's exact words, he thought. He was just fooling himself when he tried to equate Cole's relationship with their uncle to his own. He had never been the same. He frowned. There is still the matter of the dreams. Why doesn't he share my curiosity about them? Doesn't he want to know what Al-Anon has to say? Cole shrugged. Maybe he already knows. He seems to know what everyone is thinking most of the time. Pa hesitated. He hadn't considered that. Was it possible his uncle had already determined what the Druid would tell him at the Haidshorn? Could he read the mind of a shade? A man 300 years dead. He shook his head. No, I don't think so. He would have said something more than he did about the reason for the dreams. He spent all of his time dismissing the matter as one more instance when the Omsford would be used by the Druids. He didn't care what the reason was. Then perhaps he is relying on you to tell him. Pa nodded slowly. That makes better sense. I told him I was going. Maybe he thinks that one of us is going isn't enough. Cole stretched his big frame full length on the ground and stared up into the trees. But you don't believe that either, do you? His brother smiled faintly. No. You still think that it's something else? Yes. They didn't speak for a time, staring off into the woods, thinking their separate thoughts. Slender streams of sunlight played along their bodies through chinks in the limbs canopied overhead, and the songs of birds filtered through the stillness. "I like it here," Pa said finally. Cole had his eyes closed. "Where do you think he's hiding?" "Walker? I don't know. Under a rock, I suppose." "You're too quick to judge him, Pa. You don't have the right to do that." Pa bit off what he was going to say next and contented himself with watching a ray of sunlight work its way across Cole's face until it was in his eyes, causing him to blink and shift his body. He sat up, his squarish face a mask of contentment. Not much of anything ruffled Cole. He always managed to keep his sense of balance. Pa admired him for that. Cole always understood the relative importance of events in the greater scheme of things. Pa was aware suddenly of how much he loved his brother. "Are you coming with me, Cole?" he asked then. "To the Hayshorn." Cole looked at him and blinked. "Isn't it odd," he replied, "that you and Walker and even Wren have the dreams, and I don't? That all of you are mentioned in them, but never me. And that all of you called, but not me." There was no rancor in his voice, only puzzlement. "Why do you think that is? We've never talked about it, you and I, have we? Not once. I think we have both been very careful to avoid talking about it." Pa stared at him and didn't know what to say. Cole saw his discomfort and smiled. "Awkward, isn't it?" "Don't look so miserable, Pa. It isn't as if the matter is any fault of yours." He leaned close. "Maybe it has something to do with the magic. Something none of us knows yet. Maybe that's it." Pa shook his head and sighed. "I'd be lying if I said that the whole business of me having the dreams and you not having them doesn't make me very uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. I keep expecting you to involve yourself in something that doesn't really concern you. I shouldn't even ask. But I guess I can't help it. You're my brother. And I want you with me." Cole reached out and put a hand on Pa's shoulder. His smile was warm. "Now and then, Pa, you do manage to say the right thing." He tightened his grip. "I go where you go. It's the way it is with us. I'm not saying I always agree with the way you reason things out, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. So if you believe you must go to the Hatron to resolve this matter of the dreams, then I am going with you." Pa put his arms around his brother and hugged him, thinking of all the times Cole had stood by him when he was asked, warmed by the feeling it gave him to know that Cole would be with him again now. "I knew I could depend on you," was all he said. It was late afternoon by the time they started back. They had intended to return earlier, but had become preoccupied with talking about the dreams in Al-Anon, and had wandered all the way to the east wall of the valley before realizing how late it had become. Now, with the sun already inching toward the rim of the western horizon, they began to retrace their steps. "Looks as if we might get our feet wet," Cole announced as they worked their way back through the trees. Pa glanced skyward. A massive heavy rain clouds had appeared at the northern edge of the valley, darkening the whole of the skyline. The sun was already beginning to disappear, enveloped in the growing darkness. The air was warm and sticky, and the forest was hushed. They made their way more quickly now, anxious to avoid a drenching. A stiff breeze sprang up, heralding the approach of the storm, whipping the leafy branches of the trees about them in frantic dances. The temperatures began to drop, and the forest grew dark and shadowed. Pa muttered to himself as if he felt a flurry of scattered raindrops strike his face. It was bad enough that they were out there looking for someone who wasn't about to be found in the first place. Now they were going to get soaked for their efforts. Then he saw something move in the trees. He blinked and looked again. This time he didn't see anything. He slowed without realizing it, and Cole, who was trailing a step or so behind, asked what was wrong. Pa shook his head and picked up the pace again. The wind whipped into his face, forcing him to lower his head against its sting. He glanced right, then left. There were flashes of movement to either side. Something was tracking them. Pa felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle, but he forced himself to keep moving. Whatever was out there didn't have the look or the movement of either Walker Bow or the cat. Too quick, too agile. He tried to gather his thoughts. How far were they from the cottage? A mile, maybe less? He kept his head up as he walked, trying to follow the movement out of the corner of his eye. Movements, he corrected himself. There was clearly more than one of them. Pa! Cole said as he brushed close, passing through a narrow winding of trees. There's something! I know, Pa cut him short. Keep moving. They made their way through a broad stand of fir, and the rain began to fall in earnest. The sun, the walls of the valley, even the dark pinnacle of Hearthstone had disappeared. Pa felt his breathing quicken. Their pursuers were all around them now, shadows that had taken on vaguely human form as they flitted through the trees. They're closing in on us, Pa thought frantically. How much further was the cottage? Cole cried out suddenly as they pushed through a stand of red maple into a small, empty clearing. Pa, run for it! They're too close! He grunted sharply and pitched forward. Pa wheeled instinctively and caught him. There was blood on Cole's forehead, and he was unconscious. Pa never had time to figure out what had happened. He looked up, and the shadows were on top of him. They broke from the concealment of the trees all around him, bounding into view in a flurry of motion. Pa caught a brief glimpse of bent, crooked forms covered with coarse black hair and of glinting, ferret eyes, and then they were all over him. He flung them away as he struggled to escape, feeling tough, wiry limbs grapple at him. For a moment he kept his feet. He cried out frantically, summoning the magic of the wish song, sending forth a scattering of frightful images in an effort to protect himself. There were howls of fear, and his attackers shrank from him. This time he got a good look at them. He saw the strange insect-like forms with their vaguely human faces all twisted and hairy. Spider gnomes, he thought in disbelief. Then they were on him once more, bearing him down by the sheer weight of their numbers. He was enveloped in a mass of sinew and hair and thrown to the ground. He could no longer summon the magic. His arms were being forced back, and he was being choked. He struggled desperately, but there were too many. He had only a moment more to try to call out for help, and then everything went dark.